What is it that makes the British seaside sinister? Why does it seem to attract so many killers? Is it the fact that the tide washes away their sins? Is it the fact that it's the end of the line? There's nothing overly frightening about a big wheel or a carousel. But what is undeniable is that the British seaside attracts and has always attracted death and murder. Hello, I'm Geoffrey Wansell. I write about crime, true crime. And in this new series, I want you to join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where land meets the sea and where life meets death. Whilst some may consider my opinions to be bold, they have been formed after writing bestsellers about real killers for the past 30 years and staring evil in the face. For make no mistake, there is something sinister about our British seaside towns. On the surface, they're all funfairs, candy floss and breezy promenades. But by digging a little deeper in the sand, we uncover an underworld of misfits and misfeasance, murder and mayhem. And reveal the dark lives of the most deadly coastal killers to ever stalk our shores. In today's episode, we travel to the spectacular Pembrokeshire coastline, stalking ground to one of the most appalling serial killers this country has ever known. His name is John Cooper. John Cooper was a true coastal killer. He inhabited one of the most beautiful natural landscapes in the British Isles, but he haunted it like a monster in the undergrowth. He hid in plain sight and killed in plain sight, but only in this extraordinary, beautiful landscape. The experts always say that serial killers have a geographical location. Cooper's was precisely that, an intimate part of the landscape which he knew extraordinarily well. He was born in Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. He was a fisherman, farm labourer, often unemployed, married his childhood sweetheart at the age of 22 in 1966 and proceeded to have 2 children. But his life changed on a sixpence when he won a spot the ball competition and £90,000 in 1978. Not only £90,000, a king's ransom in those days, but also an Austin Princess car worth £4,000. Cooper clearly couldn't have believed his luck. Here he was, suddenly rich. The trouble was, he couldn't control himself to save his own money and rapidly squandered it in a mixture of gambling, drink and drugs, indulging in his fantasies that he was some kind of survival expert, that he could do whatever he wanted. The trouble was that what he wanted, he could no longer afford once the spot the ball money ran out. It took barely 2 years for John Cooper to squander the £90,000 from Spot the Ball. Now, he's desperate to maintain his lifestyle, so what does he do? He turns to armed robbery. Not 1, not 10, but 30. 30 armed robberies, often isolated houses, which he's known well. He is a man obsessed with himself. Children are irrelevant, wife irrelevant. What matters to John Cooper is John Cooper's own vanity. Perhaps the clearest demonstration of Cooper's vanity and psychopathy is the fact that he appeared on a popular game show at the height of his reign of terror.
Nice to see you. You're from Milford Haven down there. It's a lovely part of the world. You've got an unusual hobby, John, haven't you?
Oh, yes, the scuba diving.
The scuba diving. And apparently it's the place to do it down there, isn't it?
John William Cooper was born in 1944. He had a history of criminality from a very early age, and we know that this man was a very violent man. He had something like 30-odd convictions for burglary and robberies. So he's a long history of burglary and robbery, and then somewhere along the lines, he decides to get even more violent by actually killing people. This man has 4 convictions for murder, plus he also has convictions for sexual assault and rape. Overall, a very violent, aggressive, psychopathic man.
John Cooper was an armed robber. He constantly carried a shotgun, just in case, and he would break into houses, he would intimidate any occupants. In fact, the true body count for John Cooper and the extent of his robberies is quite unknown.
He was always on the lookout for houses to burgle, and fields that backed onto houses gave him a very good perspective of what house might be worth targeting, which house may not, of which house was occupied, or which house perhaps only had a woman in it, because that would be a target house for him, whereas he probably wouldn't have gone into a house that had a man in it.
He goes on this spiral of breaking the law, committing crimes which escalate. He's a fairly ruthless and brutal man in terms of getting his own way, and he just roams the countryside committing all sorts of crimes to sort of lay his stamp on the world, if you like. He was clearly a pretty seriously disturbing, frightening kind of character in what's a beautiful, idyllic area. He kind of, his horrible crimes subverted what was everything that was good about the Pembrokeshire coast, a place that people go to for holidays and a nice community feel. He made it into a hostile, frightening environment by committing these really quite brutal and callous crimes.
Cooper comes to terrorise the community, terrorise this area of outstanding natural beauty. But then he goes even further. Not content simply with robbery, now he wants to indulge himself. He turns to serial killing, double murders. It is indescribable and terrifying to the community. Cooper is egotistical, extraordinary, belligerent, but also very, very, very determined to have his own way. And so he targets a very rich couple, a millionaire farmer and his sister, who live in a manor house not far from where he was born, in Milford Haven, in Pembrokeshire. He decides that they have got plenty of money, and so therefore he can sustain his by now bizarre lifestyle by stealing their money.
He knew the Pembrokeshire coast because he used to be a farmer and he used to be a fisherman. He knew the area very well. In 1985, the bodies of Richard and Helen Thomas were found in their burnt-out house in Scoveston Park Manor in Pembrokeshire. Both had been murdered and the house set on fire and was destroyed. They had been killed by a shotgun.
Here was a man who was carrying out a robbery, believing she was on her own in the house as she was at that time. Threatened her, no doubt, to give him whatever was of value in the house or let him know how he would get it. But whilst he was doing that, Mr. Thomas came home in his car.
Lots of burglars will never go into violence. Most burglars will try to avoid violence. But here we've got a man that's gone from burglary into robbery. And he's robbing, he's being violent to get hold of the goods he wants. One would assume he went into the house originally with the shotgun to frighten them. You wouldn't expect him to go and actually shoot them intentionally, but you would expect him to use the gun as a weapon to frighten people. We then eventually get to a situation where he escalates it to actually robbing and killing. Did he escalate because it was enjoyable? Or did he escalate originally because he was forced to? We know that quite a few offenders escalate simply because the situation gets out of control and they have to get control again. So they will use violence, or in this case, actually use a shotgun.
Mrs. Thomas probably knew him because we were also able to prove that Cooper had some connections, very loose and some time ago, but some connections with the Thomases, and that he'd worked on their land and probably worked for them as a casual labourer some years before. So both Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Thomas probably would have known who he was, may have recognised his voice, even if he was disguising himself when he was there with Mrs. Thomas. So he undoubtedly killed Mrs. Thomas because she would have known what he'd done. Having killed both Thomases, he set fire with accelerant, diesel in all probability, from outside the farmhouse, and the farm was very, very extensively gutted.
When fire examiners eventually gained access to the property, they found that the bedroom ceiling of Mrs. Thomas had fallen through onto the floor below, and there was her charred remains. What makes this particularly disturbing was the fact that this killer had bound her before he'd shot her. He tied her arms behind her back and he put a gun to her head. This terrified, defenceless woman, and literally blew her brains out.
He was willing to just completely destroy the lives of these two well-liked and admired local people, simply to sort of cover his tracks and get away with what was a sort of fairly senseless crime. He's got the same sort of tools and methods that he uses all the time. He's always using a balaclava or a shotgun. He ties people up. So yeah, he sort of perfects this kind of technique that he's got, and it all goes back to that first murder, really.
He didn't set fire to the bodies specifically, but he did burn the house down. Now, you could speculate that that was to conceal the evidence of what had happened, but the reality is that rage in his mind was so severe, so great, that he couldn't bear for them to survive in any form at all. And you cannot, it's almost inconceivable what that must have been like. And I find it to this day extraordinary to conceive of someone who's prepared to do that. But Cooper hadn't finished. You might have thought it was more than enough to have killed 2 entirely innocent people, but he went on to kill more innocent people, and for equally no good reason whatever. This is a man who did not understand the dignity of human life at all. John Cooper not only had been lucky enough to win a lot of money on Spot the Ball, which of course he'd wasted, but then he'd also launched into a campaign of robbery and got away with every moment of it. By the middle of 1985, he'd already killed a millionaire farmer and his sister in their manor house and burnt it down. He still was uncensored. He escaped completely any kind of capture. So supremely exaggerated was his confidence that he put himself forward for an ITV game show called Bullseye, hosted by Jim Bowen, which, believe it or not, he appeared on, wearing the most extraordinary haircut, but with that overweening, exaggerated self-confidence that came to epitomise him.
John and Harvey with £220, please.
He would like to gamble.
This egotistical, narcissistic piece of work went on the programme Bullseye on television. Smug, charming, as pleasant can be. That were the 2 faces of Cooper.
20. And 1, 26.
John Cooper, in private, was an abusive individual. He was horribly abusive to his 9-year-old son, and as he grew older. And yet, down the pub, John Cooper was, one of the lads, very popular, a real character who everyone, kind of liked. And so he had that kind of dual side to himself. The whole Bullseye thing reveals another side to his character, which was he was a risk taker. He thrived on risk. He was a gambler. Psychopaths tend to have that tendency. They like to indulge in risk, take on risky adventures, take chances on things. And by brazenly going on Bullseye, I think that's another example of him just showing off in a way. Look at me, I'm on national television and I'm wanted for murder.
You would have thought he would want to keep a low profile. You go on television, if you become famous, even 15 minutes, then the media will take some interest in what you're doing, and I would have thought that would give him the attention that he didn't want. But it also shows how calm and cool and collected he was, that he could actually go on a programme, having already committed several murders, and not bat an eyelid.
We're all familiar with the famous Crime Watch programme where criminals' faces are plastered all over the television and people ring in. Well, how about this? How about Bullseye being Crime Watch? Somebody had seen an identikit picture of a man who'd committed a robbery, and they were sitting watching the television set, and they recognised straight away this man's haircut.
It meant that we had, in hard copy if you like, a film of what Cooper looked like at about the time of the Dixon murders. And we had then the artist's impression. And the fact that we could see Cooper on television, and an extraordinary performance in my view for a man who was at that stage committing the sort of crimes that he was.
Oh, unlucky.
Barely a month after Cooper appeared on Bullseye, he killed again. 2 nature lovers, Peter and Gwenda Dixon. They'd come from Oxfordshire and they'd enjoyed it. It was a beautiful place to be. One of their last walks was along the coastal path. Unfortunately for them, they encountered John Cooper.
began to see another little profit motive coming out of these situations, not simply taking money and realising money, but also to actually be able to bully individuals, to subject them to abuse, to intimidate them to the nth degree. This was, again, probably intimidation motivated by robbery. He wanted money, he wanted whatever they had, but he was very happy to bully them, tie them up, probably threaten them. We have no idea the extent to which they suffered.
He seems to get off on a sort of power trip on these things, and obviously ordering people around, terrorising them, tying them up. This is all his yearning to have control, I think, and then commit some pretty brutal crimes. I think even the detectives who turned up at the crime scene there were shocked to their core to see such a horrific crime committed in such a sort of senseless fashion.
Cooper basically held them hostage. He tied Peter Dixon up. He then tied Gwenda up and, brandishing a shotgun, demanded to know Peter's PIN number. Without a moment's hesitation, or indeed any sign whatever of remorse, Cooper killed the Dixons brutally.
It's not enough for Cooper to just get their bank details. He decides to shoot them both in the face as well, and then just leaves them at that site and go off to take the money from their bank account. I think he probably gets away with something like £300, which is obviously a paltry amount for 2 lives.
There was absolutely no need to kill them. He could have taken the money, taken the PIN numbers. Knowing the area very well, he would have been able to escape without them detecting. But he shot them. And I think because he'd already killed 2 people, it was easy for him, when pushed to the situation, to kill again. Does he get more out of killing? I don't know. He doesn't seem to be scared of it. He seems to be quite happy to use violence to get what he wants, which is classic psychopathic behaviour. He's goal-orientated for what he needs and doesn't care about the consequences or the implications of what he's doing.
Professor Bernard Knight was one of the UK's most esteemed Home Office pathologists. He was called to attend the scene of the Dixons' murder, and it was a truly perilous scene that lay before him.
Well, the cliff path went along the top of the cliffs there, and there was very heavy vegetation, I remember. It was all bushes, and the path itself was above what you might call a plateau, which is the top of the cliffs, but very heavily overgrown. I remember clambering down to this rather small area of grass between the bushes, and then the edge of the cliff was the other side of this clearing. And of course by then the people had been there trying to recover bodies and ropes and the usual paraphernalia of a crime scene. And I was asked to look at these 2 bodies, and I said more or less, no way, because it was right on the edge of the cliff. And one body was actually over the cliff still. I think it was roped up so he couldn't fall any further. But they were on a very dangerous place. They'd sort of slid over the edge, but had not gone right down the cliffs, which was 200 feet further down to the rocks and the sea. I couldn't actually see the body at first, but when things were sort of clarified and they dragged it up a bit further, I think the one that was furthest down was the lady, Gwenda Dixon. And it's obvious that she is very, very dead, with a lot of shotgun wounds, or 2 shotgun wounds. And bodies, of course, this was right in the middle of summer, going off a bit, to say the least. And then her husband, he'd also had 2 gunshot wounds, and these were obviously 12-bore, multiple pellet-type wounds, but very destructive.
The bodies had by now begun to decay, which saw Professor Knight turn to another highly specialised sphere of science to determine the all-important time of death.
We had the entomologist, the one who looks at maggots, who came along, Dr. Ersin Klioglu. He's known as Uncle Zach. And he was pretty hot at taking the life history of these various flies and bluebottles and whatever. There's a sequence of events from laying the eggs to the eggs hatching out, and then become pupae, and then eventually become adult flies. And from the sequence of events, the experts can tell how long it is from the zero time, if you like, when the eggs were laid, which is usually fairly soon after the time of death. And I think he got fairly close to I think the time was about 5 days. And by the maturation of the fly eggs and the maggots, he was pretty close to, I think, confirming the date or time when gunshot wounds had been heard.
The shocking series of murders had a devastating effect on the region.
One of the responses to Cooper's killing his 2 victims on the Pembrokeshire coast was a sharp decline in tourism. Now, we don't know whether he took a perverse interest in that and pleasure in the fact that he actually frightened so many people that they didn't use that trail for a number of years.
The crime spread fear throughout the area. People ended up making sure they lock up their homes. Everyone was looking over their shoulder. People were frightened to go out and walk along the coastal path. It was a horrific shock to the community.
They were all discussing the possible motives, robbery or some political motive even came into it because of this red herring, as it turned out, of the IRA. It was well known, I think so, that there were landings of arms on the Pembrokeshire coast. So that sort of thing was suggested for this one, that perhaps the Dixons had disturbed somebody up to no good. And it could either be drugs or possibly IRA. And in fact, there turned out to be a cache of IRA weapons and explosives, but it was nothing to do with this case at all, really.
It was a field where young people, teenagers, would wander around in the summer's evenings. But this was also an area where Cooper would routinely walk with his dog and with his shotgun. The youngsters were there, a group of 5 or 6 as I recall, boys and girls wandering about. Cooper encounters them and with his shotgun threatens them and asks them for whatever valuables they've got. Having confronted them, he got them to lay down on the ground, and when on the ground he sexually assaulted one young girl and he raped another. All at gunpoint. They were all obviously petrified. He got up, having taken whatever little bits and pieces of cash that they were able to give him, and as he walked away, he fired the shotgun in the air, which they took and no doubt was intended to be a demonstration of how powerful he was, and that he had a gun, and they'd better mind out.
John Cooper showed what we call interpersonal coherence in his crimes. Quite simply, the way that he behaved with his victims, the abusive, bullying way that he behaved with them, reflected the way that he behaved in his non-criminal life, with his wife, kids, whoever else crossed his path. It was the same bullying, threatening nature that he used. He was dyed-in-the-wool psychopath.
John Cooper was a predatory animal, a monster out of control. That part of Wales was being subject to a reign of terror that no one could ever possibly have expected. The only desperate question was, what was to come?
The supremely confident John Cooper was finally arrested and convicted of 30 burglaries and was sentenced to 16 years imprisonment. What the jury at that trial did not know was that Cooper had committed 2 double murders. Indeed, in 2009, Cooper was let out of jail after serving his sentence. But while he'd been in jail, the police had been conducting a cold case review of both sets of double murder. One of the things that came to their aid was advances in forensic technique, particularly in DNA analysis. And it was that led the police to take Cooper back into custody only weeks after his release on the burglary charges. The police had discovered trophies of his victims hidden in the hedgerow outside Cooper's house. Can you imagine how awful that must be? He's taken care not to hide them inside the house in case by chance the police search it, but he's stuck them in a hedgerow. He wanted to keep the trophies of his killing as close to him as he could.
They began to look at Cooper in connection with a series of unsolved murders they had on their books, and the forensic evidence that they had gathered in relation to these crimes took on great importance.
We're particularly interested in some items of clothing that had been recovered from hedgerows in and around the vicinity of where Cooper lived, and we started looking on, again, the branches and the clothing and samples taken from the body of the Dixons for any fibres that might match, might be of interest. And almost immediately we started finding matching fibres, and particularly with one marvellous tatty old glove, whose exhibit number was BB109, and I think that's imprinted on our brains now. BB109 was something special. But we found fibres to link the Dixons with this glove that was found in the hedgerows. The offender had a black painted gun. You know, the barrels looked as if they were black painted. Anyway, we looked at the gun and we noticed that this paint was flaking off, and so we put a bit of this debris under the microscope just to check, you know, as we would normally do. And we noticed that when it was well lit, as it is under a microscope, that it had a strange reddish cast to it, and of course that always excites our interest. And it wasn't long before we discovered that that was because there was some blood underneath, you know, on the undersurface of the paint flakes. And we profiled that, and that looked like it matched Peter Dixon. And we then stripped some of the paint off the barrels and found some more actually on the surface of the barrels themselves, underneath the paint, implying obviously that the blood got on there before they had been painted black. And we profiled that, and then that was a match, a DNA match with Peter Dixon. So that firmly linked that. And we had textile fibres to link the gun with the pair of gloves that was found at John Cooper's home address. And that just started a whole series of fibre findings, which ended up with a myriad of fibres that connected the Dixons, and also provided connections with the sexual assaults at Milford Haven, and even the body of Richard Thomas in the Scoveston murders, which was extraordinary because in that case, the house had been set on fire after the murder, making it more difficult to find evidential traces. But even there, and it's funny how I think I've learnt, if you look really hard and if you're really imaginative about things, if there's evidence there to be found, you usually do find traces of it.
The fact that he's then arrested again, this time for not one but two double murders, must have come as something of a shock. But to this vain, arrogant man, it was also a challenge. He thought to himself, I don't think they'll convict me, and I'm going to make sure they don't.
The police were warned by a psychologist to perhaps he likes to be in control, so let him talk a lot during the interview. And they did. I think they allowed him to just talk on for 3 days. But when they did eventually confront him with the evidence, he completely denied all knowledge of it, despite the fact that it was fairly convincing, a whole web of evidence tying him to the crime scenes and the victims. But he just blithely denied any involvement, and also then decided to try and drop his son into the frame instead by saying, well, my son borrows my clothes, perhaps it was him who'd done it. Now, this is a boy that he'd abused his whole life. He'd, at one point, when his son was 11 years old, he'd knocked him to the floor and pushed a shotgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger, telling the boy that he was worthless. Now, it wasn't loaded, but that is just a sign of what an abusive, horrible character he was. And yet, when he's finally cornered for doing his own horrific crimes, he tries to implicate his son instead.
At his trial, Cooper adopted the same combative attitude in court as he had done with the police.
He was a man who, from time to time, would shout out to correct a witness, or would shout out to correct a proposition that maybe I was making in opening the case to the jury. He wanted to give the impression that it was all rubbish and that we shouldn't be listened to at all. I think he overdid it. And then he gave evidence himself. He sought to build up a picture that here he was, a family man, living a normal life, present at the wedding of his daughter, where he'd given her away, and so on and so forth. But in reality, as I think it proved, when he gave evidence, he was driven into a number of situations where he had to agree that he told lies. And he told lies to a previous jury in his first trial, the robbery trial, for which he got his 16 years imprisonment. And that had the effect, I think, of making him appear to the jury to be even more wary, cold. The stares that he would give, the stares that he gave me when I was cross-examining him, were there for the jury to see. I don't think they did him any good. And as he would walk back and forth from the dock to the witness box to give evidence, as he walked past the bench where I was sitting, he would stare at me. And I think the jury were aware of this. It was a man who, I think, didn't believe that he could be stopped, that he could be convicted.
What prompted you to end the life of two innocent pensioners who were just out for an evening walk?
In court, for his trial for the two double murders, as if to underline his confidence, Cooper told the court, "You must judge me after the trial and not before." Cooper does everything he can to maintain his stance of confidence, arrogance, and ruthlessness. He puffs himself up in the dock. He looks, rolls his eyes, does everything he can to intimidate everyone in the court, including, of course, the jury itself. It is a pose that could only send a shiver down your spine. For this is a man who premeditatedly and ruthlessly killed both the Thomases and the Dixons. And in the end, it was to be the forensic evidence that convinced the jury. All the posturing in the world that Cooper tried throughout his trial did not serve him well. In the end, the jury were convinced that he was indeed a double murderer.
When the jury returned a guilty verdict, Cooper could not contain his outrage, with even the judge not spared his vitriol.
Cooper's reaction was really rather as it had been through the early part of the trial, immediately to start shouting that the jury had not been made party to some of the evidence in the case, that it was all a miscarriage of justice, that he wasn't going to listen to it anymore, and so on and so forth. And indeed, he even tried to shout the judge down when the judge was passing sentence on him at a later stage. To him, violence had become second nature. But I'm sure also because he killed the Thomases and then for some years, of course, had got away with it, killed the Dixons and for some time got away with it, I think he became emboldened by the fact that he could commit serious crimes, serious robberies, shotgun robberies, even confront a group of young men and women in a field and overpower them simply with a shotgun and a balaclava. I think he believed that he was never going to be called to book.
One of the things we say about psychopaths, they're very good at mimicking emotions. So he would mimic what he thought was the kind of acceptable behaviour to get him through life, while hiding underneath that the anger and the frustration and the aggression that he had, and that he did let out with the 4 killings, with the rape, with the other robberies and violence. He was a very violent man who was able to control it at face value, but not underneath.
To say that John Cooper was a bad egg is a big understatement. He was thoroughly rotten. Throughout most of his life, it was riddled with either criminal activity, bullying activity, generally abusing other people and profiting from this, and ultimately killing people as part of this process. He had been sentenced for 30 robberies. He probably committed far more than that. He was found to have killed 4 people, but we could probably assume that there are many other cases, unsolved cases, that John Cooper would actually be the perpetrator for.
Clearly, we can define him as psychopathic from the nature of his lack of guilt, lack of any moral reasoning, the lack of learning from his experience. He's just totally self-centered, task-orientated. He wants something, he gets it, doesn't think about the consequences.
John Cooper is now, quite rightly, spending the rest of his life behind bars. He is a man who desecrated one of Wales's most beautiful spots by the ugliest of double murders. There should be no sympathy in anyone's heart for John Cooper. He deserves to rot in jail.
Join me, Geoffrey Wansell, next time for more Murders by the Sea.